Hi, everyone. This is Rohit from Lifestyle Mastery Intro. I'm excited to have Brian Requarth, who's the co-founder of Latitude and former CEO of Viva Real. Through Latitude, he now dedicates his time to providing mentorship and advice to entrepreneurs in Latin America. Brian's new book, Viva the Entrepreneur: Founding, Scaling, and Raising Venture Capital in Latin America, shares the hard lessons he learned while building and scaling his company. It covers the best practices for communicating with a co-founder, finding great investors, and building a good board. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Hey, it's great to be on here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So, you have a great story. You've been, founder, and you now a co-founder of Latitude. How did you get your start into startups, and what got you really interested to get into entrepreneurship?
I've always been an entrepreneur since I can remember. Whether it was doing small stuff like, the typical kind of selling candy to, whatever I could do. And the projects just kind of gradually got bigger as I learned more, and the ambition got a little bigger, and the realization of what was possible expanded. And so, it's been ingrained in me and since an early, kid. But I guess the recent projects just, got a little larger in scale.
Awesome. And how did you get your start in Viva Real? What got you interested in online real estate space? How did that happen?
Sure. For the audience that doesn't know much about, what we built, basically it's similar to like Zillow, the Zillow, if you're in the US, or 99 acres if you're in India, or, wherever you may be located, REA in Australia. Basically, my personal experience was that I had a terrible kind of, experience trying to find a property when I was living in Bogota, Colombia. And I was kind of taken advantage of in the process, looking for a rental property. And I ended up not having access to all the information that was available. So there was kind of this unfair asymmetry of information. And anyways, it was a bit of a negative experience. And like most startups, good ideas start from a problem. And in this case, I had experienced that personally and realized that a lot of other people had the same problem. So we went out, and instead of, you know, after I solved my personal problem of finding a place, I decided I would go and aggregate all of the data. So there was a central repository. I came across a case study from Mercado Libre, which is today close to $100 billion market cap company. And, it's kind of started out as classifieds like eBay, and then they expanded into payments and many other things. And I realized that I wanted to build the Mercado Libre of real estate. And so that was the original kind of genesis of the idea. Quickly realized that, each country is very complicated to be across, all these different, geographies. And so we ended up honing in and going AAB, all about Brazil. And we focused 100% on building the marketplace classifieds of real estate for the country of Brazil.
That's very interesting, and it looks like you raised a lot of money. When you started off from not wrong, you've raised more than $70 million. How was the scenario when back then when you were trying to raise funds? Was it easy for LATAM entrepreneurs to raise that kind of fund for a marketplace model like yours?
Absolutely not. It was extremely difficult. It took me years to raise any capital initially. And is because there was not any really large companies at the time, and there wasn't really a venture ecosystem. So if you were in Colombia in 2010 trying to start a startup, there wasn't a Rappi or or a new bank, to like point to and say, oh, the business could become this. And there was also no venture or even angel ecosystem. So the first capital that I raised was from friends, family, and fools, like the classic kind of,
Yeah.
fortunate. My college roommate had an exit in his business, and he kindly wrote me uh, a pretty large check for the time. And then I scraped together some money from my brother, my dad, my uncle, and anyone else that would throw some money our way. So that was the early days. And that was just the reality of most startup entrepreneurs. And we had to focus on generating revenue because, no one would invest in a company that, even if you had top line growth, it just wasn't something that happened. All of that kind of changed for me personally. So I had about 2.5 years of rejection after rejection from investors. And I'd say the tipping point for me, and this is actually a great lesson for entrepreneurs listening, I was able to bring on two very strategic angel investors. One of them was, by the name of Greg Waldorf, and he happened to be the first investor in Trulia, which, was a company that scaled and raised, money from top venture funds and then ended up selling to Zillow for $3.5 billion. And so the first investor in that company also took a small bet on me and invested in my company, along with the former CEO of one of the companies I actually already mentioned, which is called REA Group, which is a $10 billion market cap company in Australia that does something relatively similar. So the two of those investors came in at a seed round and they both participated. And then, two things happened. One, I had some great insight on how to operate the business because Simon had built the same business in Australia. So I got incredible knowledge. And then two, the access to stage financing opened up for me because all of a sudden I had some credibility attached to me where, Greg had been an early investor in a success story, was a CEO that had operated tech companies and invested in tech companies. And then Simon had scaled the same business. So the fundraising the floodgates opened up after that. I ended up raising my Series A from the two top investors in Latin America, Kazek and Monashis, and they're, the early stage kind of Series A funds. And so after that happened, it was a tipping point for us. And then we were able to attract talent and capital, in a pretty, for what was a large amount of money at the time. Now it's, not as much as it was back then.
I think that's a great story, and it shows the resilience of a founder like you to keep building. But how much has LATAM ecosystem really changed in the last 10 years? You talked about Rappi, Nubank, which are great brand names, but also seen a lot of there's been an inflection point for fintech startups in LATAM. But what do you think has really changed in the last 10 years for LATAM market?
I think that there's a couple things that have happened. First of all, the quality and caliber of entrepreneurs that are tackling big ideas is increasing dramatically. And that's just the kind of the virtuous cycle of having those Nubank success stories. And, in prop tech, there's other people that came after Viva Real. There's Quinto Anda, there's Loft that are now unicorns. And then there's, many in fintech, e-commerce, across the board in every category, there's now large companies. And this is a recent trend, right? And so I think that, Mercado Libre paved the way because it's almost $100 billion company. And that showed the public markets that one, if you had invested in that stock back in 2010, you would have, probably 25, 30x your investment on the public markets. And so that churned out a lot of talent also, because people that were part of the growth, the success story of that. I mean, you take one of the funds that I mentioned, Kazek. Kazek was an early investor in our Series A, and the founders of Kazek were, one of them was a founder, and another one was like the second person to join Mercado Libre team when they were at Stanford back in the late 90s. So, it's just a classic example of a maturing ecosystem where you've got, some of the network effects of success that begets success, and then there becomes more confidence externally from outside investors. So that is kind of the inflection point that we've reached. And I would say that an additional inflection point is having some new kind of liquidity that has been, released into the market allows for those entrepreneurs that have been successful, like myself, to reinvest back in the ecosystem. And then not only does that reinvestment help with capital and getting over the kind of, the valley of death of the seed to Series A, it also provides some good quality advice and clarity because, I've made a lot of mistakes. And so I'm able to kind of share a little bit of the things that you don't want to do when you're building an early stage startup. So I think those are all things that result in a much more mature ecosystem.
Correct. And What are some of the major trends which are happening in fintech space? XP had one of the largest IPOs in the world, and there are a few companies like Hashdex which have launched world's first crypto ETF, and you look like LATAM has a huge crypto user base, which I had no idea about. So where do you think are some of the largest trends which are happening in the fintech space?
It's an enormous ecosystem, right? So it's hard for me, and I'm not an expert to go super deep in all of the aspects of fintech. But one thing that I am very confident about is at a high level, if we just take the banking system there, it's one of the highest yielding places in the world. So you take a bank like Itaú, and the margin on that business is insane. The interest rates have been astronomical forever, and the market dominance of the incumbent banks, there's basically 5 banks that have 90 something percent of the market share. So and then when you couple that fact with some of the worst NPSs that you can imagine, where people literally have they hate with a passion the existing system.
Yeah.
You present a extremely, let's call it, an appetizing environment for innovation, disruption, and an opportunity to kind of start building around the all of the opportunities that are presented in fintech. So that can be anywhere. I mean, crypto is definitely Hashdex. You mentioned, they've been doing some really impressive things there, and I expect a lot of things to happen with crypto in Latin America. I mean, the famed entrepreneur Wences Casares, who is also known as the godfather of Bitcoin, is from Argentina. He was preaching Bitcoin back in 2010 in the Silicon Valley. Finally got a few people to listen to him, and then all of a sudden Bitcoin has taken off since that. And so if you're from Argentina or you're from Venezuela, you understand immediately the risks of heavy inflation and the central bank going to shit. So that is it's an easier thing, and that's probably why the crypto adoption has been accelerated in markets like that, because there's an awareness. We look at the US as like a more of a consistent economy in that way, and it's kind of just like, it's just an acceptance that that's how things work, and it's always going to be that way. And so I think that when you come from a more volatile society, then you understand it faster, because you can understand the implications of it. So that's on the crypto side. In terms of fintech, I mean, listen, everywhere you look, there's an opportunity in fintech. There's an incredible founding team that I recently had the privilege of investing, that were part of Latitude, called Pomelo, and they're starting with kind of payments processing, and they came out of Banco de Galicia, which is the largest Argentine bank, in a company called Naranja X, which was one of the first largest neobanks in Argentina, with about 5 million customers. And taking all of that experience from that company, and Mercado Pago, which is the kind of PayPal of Latin America, owned by Mercado Libre. And there's just an opportunity there to focus and build something better than incumbents. And so I think that there's an incredible opportunity wherever you look. I mean, financial inclusion. I'm a big fan of Emma, which she's building at Heffa. Heffa is the bank for underbanked and unbanked women starting in Latin America. And I mean, that's just a tremendous opportunity where, the traditional banks are not going to play in that space, because they're just sitting on their kind of pot of gold for decades, and haven't been really forced to innovate. And so I think they're waking up, but it's the kind of the speedboat versus the freight ship comparison, or a cruise ship. Like, to turn a cruise ship around in the middle Atlantic is a slow process. And so, you're able to, on a faster kind of speedboat yacht, you can maneuver a little quicker. And so I think that the early stage ecosystem is, ripe for disruption, and that's happening as we speak.
I think that's a great knowledge about the fintech space in LATAM, and I just wanted to get back into marketplaces. Since you've been part of one, do you think one should look at chasing GMV when you're building marketplaces? Do you think that is an important metric for a founder to look at?
Do I think GMV is an important metric in
Yes.
marketplaces?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's an important metric. It gives you an idea of volume. I think that the thing that's more important if you're an early stage founder and you're building a marketplace is to make sure you have liquidity. That's the obvious, one. And I think that the GMV question will take care of itself if you're in a large market and you're providing liquidity and you're solving a problem of bringing people together. The GMV will resolve itself if it's a big pie and you're reducing friction for the two parties. So I probably I would look at GMV as like a good signal and sign of whether things are working. But I'd probably maybe depending on the marketplace, obviously marketplaces can be a lot of different things and there's a lot of different sectors. So I don't know if there's any one specific metric that I would say is the mother of all metrics, but obviously GMV is an important aspect, and it coupled with kind of the take rate and whatever your revenue model is for the marketplace.
And are there any other KPIs which founders should be aware of when they're looking into marketplaces, uh, so that they can show that growth trajectory to the investors?
Yeah, in terms of, again, this all depends on the sector you're focused on. I would say that if you're a marketplace, you should have your OMTM. You're familiar with OMTM, right?
No.
One metric that matters.
Okay.
And so I think instead of really analyzing every single metric, I think that you should, particularly this is advice goes to early stage founders, right? Less so like when you're at scale and you're optimizing your marketplace and other things. I think that in our case, having the obsession with one specific metric allows for focus and allows for unlocking value in a much more efficient way. If you're trying to manage a list of 10 KPIs and you're an early stage marketplace, there's usually one thing that releases value, and in our case, that kind of value was really released by in real estate. It's a bit different than other marketplaces. You have to look at which side of the marketplace is harder. Is it the supply side? Is it the demand side? And you have to look at the business model. Are you a verticalized solution? Are you participating in the a take rate? And is it a full stack solution? There's many, is it a managed marketplace? There's so many different variables of marketplaces. But when I look at our success, I would say that one of the key components to why we were successful was we had a really clear metric of what was success for us. And in our case, we understood that in a real estate marketplace, you needed to have all the inventory, because if you're a consumer and you're looking for a property in a specific neighborhood, if you only have 10% of the inventory available, you're not providing a good consumer experience, because you're not, giving the kind of the options that are available, and therefore the decision-making process isn't fully complete. And so we obsessed about pretty much one metric, which was volume of inventory. And we also understood that volume of inventory was tied to the demand. So the more supply we got, the more demand we got, because it was directly connected with, the search in Google. More inventory we had, became more indexed properties we had, and the better rankings we had in Google for, searches for real estate in a specific neighborhood. And there was an inflection point when we had a certain number of listings in a specific geographic region that kind of brought us up to the top of the search results. So that advice would not be good advice if you're a jobs marketplace, or because, just the inventory is not the only thing that helps you. If you aggregate every single job, but you don't have people searching for the jobs, then you have a bunch of frustrated companies that don't, end up filling the jobs because there's not a good kind of, the kind of the imbalance of supply and demand isn't there. And so I think that it all depends on the marketplace. But my advice to early stage founders is to figure out what your one metric is that unlocks massive amounts of value, and then obsess over that metric and, kind of nail that before you kind of scale everything else.
No, I think this is great because one main metric is what a marketplace founder should really look at, and it's part of a travel marketplace called Oyo Rooms in India, and we really went after one particular metric was when we are adding more supply into the market. But when it comes to marketplaces, and somebody's trying to build a B2B or B2C marketplace, what do you think comes first, the supply or demand? What would your advice be for a founder who's trying to build a marketplace? What should come first? Should they focus more on supply or demand?
Again, I think it goes back to the business and the business model, and like which marketplace is harder. Is there one that's more, needs more kind of aggregation? Is there one that so it really depends on. I would probably focus on the harder side of the marketplace first, and really figure out how to crack that. But I don't want to give all-encompassing advice, because again, the marketplace itself is it's a marketplace of marketplaces. So
yeah.
I don't want to give generic advice, and oftentimes I'll have a conversation with the founder and I'll ask a handful of questions. If you go to NFX, they're a great fund, early stage seed and kind of Series A investor. They have incredible content about marketplace businesses and network effects. And I would link up some of the articles that they've written. They even have some questionnaires for founders that, basically ask them question. It's a scorecard. So I would type in Google NFX marketplace scorecard. And then I would fill out the scorecard and basically, is it one-sided? Is it two-sided? Is it a three-sided? Is it an n-sided marketplace? And I would, kind of really, really evaluate where you fit into this. And then I think that you'll get some good, ideas around, what the economic advantage is for the supply side and economic advantage for the demand side, and really try to, understand, is this a high frequency on the demand side? Is it a low frequency? Is there the average sales price is X? How many suppliers do we have in the marketplace? What's the volume of buyers that are there? And I think all those questions should basically point you in the right direction for you to have clarity on where you should be focusing. And so I just want to, caution against giving, kind of all-knowing advice when I think a lot of this really depends on your specifics of what you're building.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. I think a generic advice is not applicable here. We'll put the NFX scorecard link in our show notes. And you also co-founder of Latitude. Is Latitude very similar to Y Combinator, and is like a fellowship? And what made you build Latitude?
Sure. So I'll first say what it is, and then I'll talk more about how it. So in terms of what it is, it's in progress. So we don't really know what we're going to become yet. Like most startups, we know what problem we're trying to solve for, which is just the journey of an early stage founder in Latin America is just impossibly hard from many standpoints. From the moment you create your company, literally it's a hard process. Like it took me 6 months to set up my operation just from a legal standpoint. And it's easier now, but it's still a lot of friction. So to building your team, to raising capital, finding customers, all those things are it's just particularly hard in Latin America for many number of reasons. So that's the particular problem that we're trying to do. And we think that we can solve that by building a strong community, a series of products that, service early stage founders, which we have in our roadmap. And then we've also snapped on a small, tiny angel, called an angel fund, a rolling fund on AngelList, so we will, you think about capital, advice, and network as kind of 3 chunks of value add for founders. And I think most of the existing kind of, investment funds out there, they really provide mostly capital, and the advice and the network is not really the forte of most investors. And so we actually started Latitude with the mentality 100% focused on the advice and network. We didn't even have capital. And that was, we unbundled the capital from the network and the advice, and we wanted to get really good at the network and the advice, because it's easy to get people to like you when you have money.
Right.
I can, it's easy to become friends with someone when they're looking for capital from you.
Right.
But when you're just there trying to help and make their journey easier and support them, whether that's, psychologically or with advice or whatever it is. So we built this robust community. I would describe it as YC and Stanford having a Latin baby. That would be my kind of like fun way of describing it. But, it's a bit like YC because we have an admissions process that's very stringent and tough to get into. There's a high, number of curated founders. We don't actually take equity in the company by getting in. At least we don't today. We may evolve the business in the future. We actually feel that YC is a great value add to what we're building, because in some cases we'll prep founders to get into YC. And we've had probably close to a dozen founders that have already gone through YC that have come through our program. And so I don't look at it as a kind of competitive scenario. I look at it more as an opportunity for us to expand the ecosystem. And if that's a direction you want to take as a founder and you want to go to YC, we're happy to help. We might toss a small check in also. That's something that we as we have this rolling fund. So that's kind of in a nutshell what we do. And we're also hyper local, right? So, YC is a global thing, and they have a lot of founders from Latin America, but all of our mentor network, all of our LPs in the fund, all of our participants, they're all focused on building or investing or supporting Latin America. So that kind of gives us a nice edge over anyone that's trying to build something similar. And so that's in a nutshell what we are. It's an education company meets a fund, all tied up in a really nice virtual remote community.
All right. And, I just want to deep dive into your investment thesis. Are you stage or sector agnostic? Since focusing only on Latin America, are there any certain sectors that you focus on?
We're religiously focused on early stage, okay, because that's where we think that the need is. And so we invest from PowerPoint to kind of MVP, through kind of, seed. So maybe you've got, kind of product market fit and you're going to raise your Series A. We try to come in before that. And that's at least kind of our thesis right now. The checks are small, anywhere from 25 to 250. We may invest 25 or 50K in a founder at a PowerPoint that we think is high potential and that we think we can help. And that, it's kind of like a pre-YC thing where it would be less equity than YC would take. And then we would also plug you into a local network. So the thesis is still evolving, but another thing that we believe is that Latin America is not a monolith. And so there's Mexico, there's Argentina, there's Chile, there's Brazil, there's Peru, there's all these different places. So we see an opportunity to be the first kind of unified community of the region, where maybe you're building something in Sao Paulo and someone's building something similar in Mexico. And I had a call with a founder who's building a prop tech today in Brazil. It's in the kind of vacation home space, and then someone is doing something in Mexico, and they're very similar. The TAM is so large in both those markets for a real estate prop tech because it's the largest asset class in the world, and so it's pretty easy to justify. You can support both founders, then you can bring them together. They can share notes, they can share advice, they can help each other, and in some cases there'll be competing theses, and that's okay. We can't we want to just elevate the ecosystem, and that's bound to happen. So our role is really just an ecosystem builder is what we're doing.
Got it. And
in terms of sector, just to respond to the last part, we try to invest in stuff we know, which is, typically fintech, prop tech, software as a service type businesses, e-commerce, ed tech, health tech are the kind of and we're not experts in most of those, but we have someone in our network that is. And so whether they're an LP in our fund or they're an advisor and a mentor. And so we can be pretty broad on the spectrum of sector focus. Probably won't do any like biotech or any other thing that's outside of the scope of what we at least have a general understanding of.
Got it. And when you talk about Latitude Fellowship, is it like a 3 month program, or like a 4 week? I think it's a 4 week program where do you also provide help after they've gone through the fellowship?
Sure. We're kind of testing. We started with a 2 week program, then we did a 4 week program. Now we're looking at a 6 to an 8 week program. So we are very, the advantage of doing a 2 to 4 week program initially is that you have faster iterations and faster learning. So it didn't make sense for us to do a 3 month program or a 6 month program because we wanted to learn faster. So we will probably find our sweet spot, and probably somewhere in between kind of 6 to 8 weeks, I think would be the sweet spot. And yeah, in terms of the continued help, we can invest in every company that comes through our platform, but we'll invest in a handful of companies. We've made 2 investments so far, and we'll probably, average, I would say, fully ramped like 10 to 12 a quarter. And so all of the companies that are in our portfolio will continue to support and help. That's part of the advantage of taking money from us, is we have an incredible network and a lot of good operating experience. But we also see the community as a way to scale the help. Because if you're dropping into Mexico City and you're trying to, get a fintech license, we already have 4 or 5 people in our community that have done that. And so drawing out the kind of plans for how that works can be something that we can give exposure to in our community, because we've built this really deep, and you're part of On Deck, and On Deck is a great inspiration for us. I'm a big fan of Eric and David and the whole team. And, I'm an On Deck, ODF 4. And so I, a lot of the principles that we have are very inspired in what they've done. We don't plan on scaling out all of our fellowships and doing this for podcasters and everyone else. Like, I think what they're doing is to go wider. We will go deeper in what we're building, and it'll be more around venture-backed companies and product development, probably, that will enable, just as a spoiler, we're looking at building a company formation product like Stripe Atlas, where founders can go and build their company online and, have their local operating entity, which is something today that you can't do on Stripe because they can't build it for the entire world. They can only build it for a specific geographic region. And you can't launch a Cayman Islands company from Stripe Atlas, which is the actual entity that you should be building for if you're building something in Latin America. Because, in my case, I built a Delaware C Corp, and the result of that was over $100 million in unnecessary taxes that I had to pay the US government, not me personally, but the company, because we didn't even operate in the US. So we shouldn't have had to pay taxes in the US. And unfortunately, I learned the hard way. And so that's an example of one of the products that we will build to streamline the process and reduce the friction of founding and scaling a company in Latin America, which is what we, are focused on.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and I'm a big fan of On Deck, and the kind of community you're building. So, I want to talk about COVID. Has it really impacted the Latin market? And have there been any learnings and findings in the last 1 year or so for you?
Well, listen, COVID is a really difficult situation, obviously, for everybody. But, if you look at places like Brazil or Mexico, it's been a super challenge. So that's, first of all, my heart goes out to anyone that's struggling with that. The obvious tailwinds that happen from this, which is incontrovertible for most tech companies, I tend to put, companies in 3 buckets. You're either taking advantage of the tailwinds of like this, digital revolution that's happening and being accelerated by the current landscape. You are maybe not immediately impacted to a great deal, or you have some aspect of your business that is, dramatically affecting, and there's headwinds. So if you're obviously in the tourism business, like you're suffering, or if you're in the events business, unless you're a digital, events company, you're getting crushed. And so I would say that if I look at my angel portfolio of 60 companies, I would say 80% of them are experiencing tailwinds. Maybe it's more like 70. I would say 20% are not affected. And then 10% are probably having some negative impacts of of COVID. So I think that the other silver lining, if you could, say that there's something positive that's come out of it, obviously it doesn't outweigh all of the, everything that's going on that's difficult, but the remote nature of, the opportunity to, the amount of investments that I've done have been, all remote, and it's all on Zoom, and it's, and that's something that is been good for early stage founders, because the friction of capital raising has become easier, because the capital is essentially, it's like, the data packets through Zoom is the new kind of opportunity for reaching investor, right? So it's just like the friction is reduced. You're able to talk to more investors in a shorter period of time. They're committing the initial capital without having to meet you. And that's something that I think has been positive for pre-seed and seed investors.
Got it. Yeah, no,
And
absolutely.
for founders and investors, right? Both.
Yeah. No, absolutely. COVID has been a great inflection point, needs to be, and seen, how the digital revolution will go from here. And, Brian, you also wrote a book which is called Viva the Entrepreneur, where you talk about some of the lessons, what made you write the book, and what was the whole journey about writing and, publishing the book?
Rohit, the idea for writing the book was because I screwed up so many things building my company that I felt like it was a duty and a responsibility to help entrepreneurs avoid those mistakes. So the format of the book is broken into 3 kind of sections. One is the psychology piece, which I think is undiscussed. Just the toll it takes to build a company, and the emotional, psychological aspects of building a company, and co-founder dynamics and family and all those elements. It's just something that I think is undervalued and underestimated. And so I wanted to, and I had my personal struggle, running out of money, and all of the stresses that come, and anxiety that comes with getting something off the ground, and carrying the weight of your investors and your team and all those things. And so that's a portion of the book. The second part is more of the operations and kind of the scaling, and building the team and all that stuff. And so I think I made some mistakes there, and I think I learned some things along the way. And then the last thing, the fact that when you're raising capital, there's such an asymmetry of information between you as a founder and the investors, because of the fact that they do this for a living, and they do it 100 times to every one time you do it. And so they're just much more experienced in that. So it's my, to quote kind of Brad Feld, I hope that part of my book will help entrepreneurs become smarter than their investor, or their venture capitalist, or their lawyer. And so I actually had some great lawyers over at Gunderson review a lot of the sections around the fundraising aspects and the terms and what's important in a term sheet. It really comes down to, the economics and control are the main things that are important in a term sheet. And so a lot of founders that are inexperienced, you'll see, I remember being a kind of a young entrepreneur starting out, I was freaked out by all the things in a term sheet because I didn't understand them. And then what is registration rights, and it creates a lot of unnecessary kind of distractions for you when you need to focus on specific things. Obviously, the SAFE and the convertible note, have kind of made that a little more simple. But at the end of the day, when you're raising your Series A, and you haven't seen a term sheet before, I tried to make, that a little easier. And then also just the dynamics of how to fundraise, and how to create kind of deal heat, and how to work with your investors, and then also the relationship you have going forward with your investors, and how to, be a good steward of the capital, and, be a good communicator with your investors, is something I try to touch on. So it really covers quite the kind of spectrum of topics that I think most founders that are raising venture capital should be aware of.
All right. And, I recently had Eric Su, who runs the Marketing School podcast, and, he had also released his own book. And, he talked about that, writing a book, it's like a 5-year journey. And, I just wanted to understand what was your process of writing the entire book, and, what were some of the routes you took to publish and promote the book?
Yeah. So first of all, if you're planning on writing a book, contact scribemedia.com. This is, Zach over there, and, Zach and shit, I just forgot his name. Edit this out if you will, because I don't want to bomb his name. Max Tucker. Max Tucker is the founder of Scribe Media. And basically, if you're writing a book, this is the way to do it. I contacted Scribe and I had been taking notes for a book for a long time because while I was building the company, I realized how ridiculous some of the process was and how like I just was making all these mistakes, and I had an awareness that I thought it would be a good opportunity to share some of the things that I'd learned on the journey. And I also realized that there wasn't any like really good local stories in Latin America. All the inspiration comes from like, Amazon or Facebook or Google. And, I think that when I look at my journey, I read a case study from Mercado Libre, and that was my kind of inspiration. And so I think that having local stories is really important because it provides entrepreneurs something more relatable than like, being on Sand Hill Road and raising capital, in the US. So, and scaling a business in the US. So the process for writing it was I contacted Scribe and I had a lot of ideas and notes. And basically I had a scribe, which, this guy named Mark who lives in New York, and we had calls for like a few months, and I would literally dictate the book to him verbally. So I would literally tell him everything about that I wanted to include in the book. He helped me organize my thoughts, and like a scribe. I mean, if you think back to the days of like, Socrates and, Plato, there was scribes back then. And, that's people that can help you kind of organize your thoughts and and so you can call it cheating, or you can just call it finding a smarter work stream. But that was the ultimate kind of way that I did this. And so I did it in a relatively efficient manner, I'd say. It still took me 18 months from kind of, picking up the pen, so to speak, and then getting it hot off the press. But it was a much more efficient and streamlined journey. I was able to do other things. I transacted on my company at the same time. And so I was able to kind of be efficient in getting from, start to finish. And then in terms of marketing the book, it's a very niche book, right? Even though I do think it's relevant for anyone. I have two founders that are from India that are in our Latitude Fellowship. One from New Delhi, and the other one I think is from, I think he's from Bombay. I don't remember, but both of those founders are living in Latin America, and they both say this is relevant for India. So it's Viva the Entrepreneur, starting, founding, scaling, and raising venture capital in Latin America. But you could probably substitute that for any kind of emerging market in the world. And I mean, it's even relevant for the US, but I wanted to write it for a specific audience. So the marketing of the book, we became a bestseller on Amazon for, a little over a week. It was the #1 book in venture capital in the US. I was happy that it passed Theranos, which is, the bad blood, which is kind of a pretty tough thing to kind of pass, because that's a really exciting, much more interesting than my book. And so, but it just shows that there was a lot of demand for this. And then, it's from there, it's done pretty well. And it's now published in Brazil in Portuguese, and the Spanish version is coming in the next kind of couple months.
I think this is super inspiring, and we'll put that a book in the show notes. I quickly want to do the top 3. What's your favorite business book?
Favorite business book? I gotta, like, if I'm gonna answer the question a little differently. I'm gonna say, instead of favorite, business book that most impacted me. Okay. And I would say, on my entrepreneurial journey, I came across the book by Chris Anderson, The Long Tail, and that completely changed my thinking about businesses, marketplaces. But I would say my favorite business book is probably The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And, the Linda Rottenberg, who is the founder of Endeavor, Endeavor Global is the entrepreneurial organization that is uplifting, founders, in 40 countries, and they've had an incredible impact. She wrote the foreword for my book, and she kindly compared it to The Hard Thing About Hard Things for Latin America, which, was a huge compliment to me.
Well, no, I think that's very exciting. And, Hard Things About Things is one of the most mentioned books, on the podcast, because I think a lot of guests do mention is their favorite business book. And, if you could go back in time when you started Viva Real or Latitude, what is the one thing you would done differently or focused on just one thing?
I think that if I were to speak to my kind of like, maybe not in the beginning of the company, but like the advice that I would give myself, it's really hard when you're starting because the beginning part of your journey is about survival. It's about, living to see it, to see another day. And it's really hard to be a long-term thinker when you're building something because you're optimizing to avoid death, right? That's the
Right.
beginning. But I would say that like as an early stage entrepreneur, I would encourage myself to know that it is a sprint in the beginning, but you don't want to sprint so much that you can't make it to mile 26 on the marathon, because it's also a marathon. So I think that I would encourage myself to think a little bit more long term about what I was building and not be in such a like it's okay to be in a rush because speed is the ultimate competitive advantage in startup land. But at the same time, you know, obsessing about this, and I guess this is a luxury that I have today where I can build for Latitude. The lesson I had from Viva Real to build Latitude is that it really is a marathon. And if I'm thinking in a decade, like as a time horizon, I think I can out innovate most anyone that does something similar to me because everyone's thinking about a quarterly basis. And so it's balancing the optimization to avoid death while not losing sight of the big prize, that can come with like relentless pursuit of a huge dream over a decade. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think you put it very well. It's like a marathon and sprint, and you need to balance it out so that you can really go long. It's like what Eric Torenberg says. It's like 100-year journey, so you just need to keep going.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And finally, what's your favorite online tool? For example, Gmail, Slack, Zoom. Do you have a online tool?
Online tool. Let me open up my cell phone so I can just see what I use mostly.
Sure.
If it's a work productivity question, I would probably say my favorite work productivity tool would be, I would probably say if I were to describe the one that I use the most, it's either WhatsApp or Slack. But I think that just to answer the question, I don't love either one of them because I'm a slave to both of them, right? So,
Right.
but I think that those are the two that I find myself using most on a day-to-day basis. And then if it's like for fun, I can't deny, I'm embarrassed to say it, but TikTok is quite entertaining. Like, and so, I've been, I can go down the rabbit hole of TikTok once in a while. But I'd say those are the two kind of, or the three things that I probably, you know, consume the most.
Got it. Yeah, no, these three are all very useful. It's just that TikTok is banned in India, but yeah, till time wasn't banned. I think TikTok was very famous in India as well.
You're
And
not missing that much. You're probably more productive. It's for me, it's like if I want to just like not think about something and I can distract my mind and be brainless for like 15 minutes, that's my guilty 15 minutes of just like not thinking about anything and just maybe laughing or being entertained.
got it. And Brian, what is the best way people can reach out to you and know more about Latitude and your book, Viva the Entrepreneur?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter. Brian Requarth, is my handle, which is just my name. And then, I'm on Clubhouse at REQ. LinkedIn is another way to reach me, but like I get so much spam on LinkedIn that I might not see what you send me. So direct messages on Twitter are more efficient. And yeah, and then latitude.com. And then if you're a potential investor that happens to be an operator or a GP of a top fund, and you want to kind of buy a basket of early stage LATAM startups, our rolling fund, you can check it out at fund.latitude, which is latitude without the E, latitude in Spanish, Latitude,
Okay.
fund.latitude.com. And that will give you more information about our subscription and minimum check. And you can deep dive a bunch of stuff on LATAM there, because there's some good, interesting things about the ecosystem.
Got it. We'll put that in the show notes. Brian, thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us. I really enjoyed my conversation with you.
Likewise, it was great. Thank you for reaching out, and it's a pleasure to chat with you, and good luck with everything, and congrats on the podcast. It's an inspiration that you've been doing this for 3.5 years, because the Latitude podcast just started last year. And so can I ask you a question?
Sure, absolutely.
What is the advice you have for me that I'm early in my podcasting journey? What would be the single thing that you learned that you think is useful for me as I embark on the journey of kind of trying to democratize more access to information and founders and investors in Latin America? What advice do you have?
I think content cadence and just being consistent, and not trying to miss out any week where you're not releasing a podcast. I just know that I've just missed out 2 weeks where I've not released a podcast, and since I remember this, means I've been very consistent and just pushing out one podcast a week. I know there's some bigger podcasters who are doing 100 150 podcasts a year, but I do around once a week, and I make sure that I don't miss out on the podcast. So something like a Seinfeld strategy where you're just not missing out on any weeks, and just being consistently producing podcasts has helped me get to 180 podcasts now.
Nice. Yeah, I'm catching up with Harry Stebbings tomorrow, and it looks like he reached an inflection point when he just was consistent, and so I'm interested in hearing what his experience is. And yeah, I was wondering, do you have any good resources for scaling up the editing? Because if you know anyone that can help with that. We have like one editor, but I'm actually considering doubling down and doing 2 to 3 a week. And in order to do that, I'm going to need more resources. Is there a service that you use? If you could share more information about how you do that.
I actually outsourced the editing work, but Audacity is one of the best editing tools, and the couple of them. But
when you outsource it, do you have someone that does it, and do they have capacity to do more?
I can definitely hit up with my editor and ask if they can handle more work. But there's a lot of good editing tools and editors who can always edit the work.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, it'd be great if you have a resource there. I'm looking for other ways to scale it. What do you pay per episode?